Noah Brenner vanished before the bodies were even discovered, and that single disappearance changed everything investigators thought they knew. Charlotte Brenner spent years hiding her family's flaws, but nothing could prepare her for the horror that unfolded inside her own mansion. Jacob Brenner built an empire on control, yet the one person he could not control was the son who would destroy their legacy. Detective Marlowe walked into the Brenner mansion expecting answers, but each room only raised more questions about Noah's true intentions. Evelyn Cross, the forensic analyst assigned to the case, knew immediately that the identical marks on the victims were no accident. They were a signature. Liam Porter, the missing persons specialist, had seen strange cases before, but Noah's disappearance felt less like a runaway and more like a carefully designed exit. Dr. Harlan Vex, a behavioral expert, warned authorities early on. Whoever manipulated Noah had been hiding in the shadows for years. The Brenner guests thought they knew their hosts, but Noah Brenner had been watching them long before they ever sat at the table. The town of Maplewood had a calm, predictable rhythm every Thanksgiving, a rhythm that comforted its residents and made the holiday feel almost sacred. Families filled their homes with the warm smells of roasted vegetables, seasoned meats, and pies cooling on windowsills. Children ran across leaf-covered sidewalks carrying handmade decorations from school projects, while adults waved from porches as they prepared their own holiday feasts. In Maplewood, nothing ever felt rushed and nothing ever felt dangerous. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and trusted their neighbors without hesitation. This sense of peace had been passed down for generations, becoming part of the town's identity. Among its residents, the Brenner family stood out more than most. Their mansion was the largest house in Maplewood, a symbol of old money and long-standing influence. The Brenners hosted the biggest Thanksgiving dinner every year, and the event had become more than a family tradition. It was a town attraction. Invitations were highly sought after, not because of the wealth on display, but because everyone considered the Brenners the definition of perfection. The family supported local schools, funded community events, and donated generously to charity. Many people believed the Brenners represented everything good about Maplewood. No one suspected that the family carried secrets behind their polished exterior. In the days before the holiday, the mansion buzzed with activity. Caterers arrived with crates of ingredients, decorators set up floral arrangements, and delivery trucks came and went with gifts and supplies. The mansion's windows glowed softly at night, casting warm light over the snowy lawn. To anyone walking by, it looked like a perfect picture of holiday spirit. Yet beneath that brightness, small hints of unease were beginning to take shape, hints too subtle for outsiders to notice. Inside the Brenner home, tension simmered quietly. Some staff members whispered about unusual instructions they had received, tasks that didn't match previous years. Others noticed rooms being locked without explanation and certain areas being cleaned repeatedly even though no one had entered them. A few workers felt watched, as if their movements were being monitored more closely than usual, but they dismissed the feeling, telling themselves it was only holiday stress. The family itself acted strangely as Thanksgiving approached. Their interactions felt rehearsed, their smiles slightly forced, and their conversations unusually short. Despite their efforts to maintain a polished image, something about them seemed off. Still, Maplewood trusted its beloved Brenners too much to suspect anything more than ordinary holiday pressure. On the night before Thanksgiving, the mansion stood brightly lit, appearing cheerful from the outside. Snowflakes drifted down onto the rooftops, and a quiet stillness settled over the neighborhood. However, inside, a shadow had already passed through the home, silent, calculated, and unnoticed. Something had gone terribly wrong, though no one outside the mansion could sense it. The atmosphere inside held a heaviness that didn't match the glowing windows, as if the walls themselves knew a secret they dared not reveal. The Brenner mansion, once a symbol of joy and celebration, was about to become the center of the most horrifying event Maplewood and the world would ever witness. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the same cheer Maplewood had always known. The Brenner mansion looked like a picture from a holiday magazine, with wreaths on each door, ribbons on every staircase, and the smell of spices drifting out into the cold air. Guests arrived in warm coats carrying gifts and desserts, ready to enjoy the famous Brenner feast. Laughter echoed in the entrance hall as relatives greeted one another and friends admired the carefully decorated rooms. Everything seemed perfect, exactly what people expected from the town's most admired family. Inside the dining area, the long table looked more extravagant than ever. Golden plates reflected the soft glow of chandelier lights, and crystal glasses sparkled beside neatly folded napkins. The food that filled the table was almost overwhelming. Roasted turkey glistening under layers of seasoning, cinnamon pies cooling near the windows, freshly baked bread arranged in baskets, and countless side dishes prepared with careful attention. The atmosphere felt festive, warm, and inviting. Yet beneath all the joy, something felt strangely off. Subtle glances between certain family members hinted at uneasiness. Some guests noticed it but brushed it aside, assuming the Brenners were simply exhausted from preparing such a large celebration. Still, one detail stood out above everything else: the absence of Noah Brenner. As the eldest son and the future heir to the family's reputation, he had never missed a Thanksgiving dinner. His chair sat empty at the far end of the table, the polished wood shining under the lights. His parents explained that he was resting, but their voices seemed slightly strained and their smiles didn't reach their eyes. As more guests arrived, conversations flowed and plates filled with food. The earlier tensions softened but never fully disappeared. People tried to enjoy the celebration, telling themselves that every big family had small problems that weren't meant for outsiders to understand. Still, a few guests exchanged quiet looks, sensing that something deeper was unfolding behind the scenes. Midway through the meal, without warning, the mansion's staff vanished. A few guests noticed that the servers who had been moving constantly between the kitchen and dining room had suddenly stopped appearing. Dishes that should have been refilled remained untouched. No one came to clear plates or offer more drinks. At first, people assumed the staff had stepped away for a break, but as minutes passed, the silence became unsettling. A once busy household felt strangely hollow. Then, without the slightest hint of trouble, the entire mansion went dark. The chandeliers flickered before shutting off completely, and the room fell into thick darkness. Gasps filled the space as people tried to understand what had happened. The quiet that followed was unnerving, interrupted only by the faint hum of the heating system shutting down. The blackout lasted only a moment, but it felt endless to those inside. When the lights finally returned, the scene that appeared was far beyond anything imaginable. Every guest who had been sitting at the table was now lifeless, each placed in a perfectly measured circle around the long dining table. Their bodies lay unnaturally still, positioned with chilling precision as though part of a ritual or deliberate display. No plates were overturned, no chairs were disturbed, and nothing in the room suggested panic. The arrangement was too exact, too orderly, too intentional. One instant, a joyful Thanksgiving celebration had transformed into a scene of unimaginable horror, marking the beginning of the darkest chapter in Maplewood's and the world's ever witness. Police cars filled the driveway of the Brenner mansion within minutes, their flashing lights illuminating the snow-covered lawn. Officers entered the house expecting chaos, but what they found left them speechless. There were no unturned chairs, no broken glass, and no signs of panic. The victims looked as though they had simply been placed where they lay, each positioned with unsettling precision. What disturbed investigators most were the identical marks on every body, marks that indicated a single, highly controlled method had been used. It was unlike anything they had seen before, and the silence inside the house made the scene even more haunting. Detectives inspected every room, searching for any clue that might explain what had happened. The doors were locked from the inside, the windows were sealed, and the alarms showed no signs of tampering. It was as if the killer had materialized inside the house without being detected. The mansion, once admired for its grandeur, now felt like a sealed chamber hiding a dark secret. Officers walked through its corridors with increasing unease, noticing details that deepened the mystery. Expensive items were untouched, nothing had been stolen. Everything appeared intentional. By the end of the first day, the story had reached every major news network. Reporters flooded Maplewood's quiet streets, filming live broadcasts and interviewing fearful residents. Camera crews camped in front of the mansion around the clock, documenting every update with urgency. Specialists from different countries flew in to offer their expertise, each hoping to decipher what seemed like an impossible crime. Forensic analysts studied the bodies, psychologists examined the family's history, and security experts reviewed the mansion's surveillance systems. Investigators expanded their search and uncovered more hidden areas throughout the mansion. One space held maps, schedules, and diagrams that outlined every movement of the family and their guests during previous holidays. Another contained records of the staff's routines, including when they worked alone and when they rotated rooms. Every discovery pointed toward long-term planning, executed with discipline and secrecy. The mansion, once admired for its beauty, now felt like a carefully designed stage Noah had controlled from behind the scenes. Eventually, the trail led detectives away from Maplewood entirely. Phone records and supply transactions pointed to a remote cabin deep in the woods, a place far removed from the comfort and luxury of the Brenner estate. When authorities arrived, the cabin appeared abandoned, but inside they found overwhelming evidence confirming Noah's intentions. The walls were covered with blueprints of the Brenner mansion, each marked with measurements, entry points, and structural notes. A table held a collection of precision tools, each cleaned and organized with unsettling care. Nearby, folded and stored with perfect tidiness, were the uniforms belonging to the missing mansion staff. Investigators realized that Noah had used them to move through the house unnoticed, blending in seamlessly during the preparations. The cabin contained no indication that anyone else had been helping him. Every note, every object, and every recorded detail pointed to a single person acting alone. The truth settled heavily on the investigative team. Noah had orchestrated the entire event by himself. He had positioned himself where no one would suspect him, controlled the environment from within, and used his understanding of the household to manipulate every variable. What unsettled investigators most was the absence of any emotional explanation. The journals did not describe anger, revenge, or jealousy. Instead, they reflected a calculated intent, built on a distorted idea of perfection. The level of detail in his plans made it clear that this had not been an impulsive act, but a long, meticulous preparation carried out quietly over the years. Yet even with all the evidence laid bare, one question remained unanswered. Where was Noah now? The cabin held no sign of struggle, no indication of recent activity, and no clue to his next move. His presence was everywhere in the evidence, yet he himself was nowhere to be found. The mastermind had revealed his methods, but not his fate, leaving the investigation suspended in a silence as chilling as the crime itself. Just when investigators believed they had finally pieced together the truth behind the Thanksgiving tragedy, an unexpected discovery shattered every conclusion they had drawn. A structural engineer examining the remote cabin noticed an unusual hollow sound behind a wooden wall panel. When authorities removed the boards, they uncovered a narrow cavity filled with a second set of journals, far older, far more chaotic, and written in a completely different style. The handwriting was sharper, uneven, and marked by abrupt changes in pressure, unlike Noah's controlled and precise script. What these new entries contained transformed the entire case into something far more frightening. The journals revealed a narrative that contradicted everything authorities thought they knew. According to the mysterious author, Noah Brenner had not been the architect of the massacre, but its manipulated instrument. The entries described years of quiet psychological conditioning, carried out with extreme patience and relentless observation. The writer detailed how Noah had been chosen as a subject long before the tragedy, monitored throughout his childhood, and influenced through subtle techniques designed to reshape his perception of order and control. The writer wrote about adjusting Noah's environment, steering his thoughts, and guiding him toward a distorted worldview where the correction felt like his own idea. These claims were unsettling enough, but what disturbed investigators most was the writer's tone. The journals did not contain guilt or justification. Instead, the author described the process as an experiment, a long-term project conducted with cold detachment. The journals outlined Noah's habits, fears, and relationships, analyzing them with scientific precision. Every major event in Noah's life appeared to have been observed, possibly even orchestrated. The more authorities read, the more it appeared that Noah had been shaped for years by someone who knew how to push him without leaving any trace. Handwriting experts were brought in immediately. After thorough analysis, they confirmed that the journals were authentic and not fabricated to mislead investigators. However, they also concluded that the handwriting did not match anyone connected to the Brenner family or the known staff members. The mystery deepened when DNA collected from the journal pages led to an unsolved case from 17 years earlier, a missing individual whose disappearance had baffled authorities at the time. No body had ever been recovered, and no suspects had been identified. The case files describe the person as intelligent, resourceful, and possibly engaged in unusual independent research before vanishing. Now investigators were forced to consider the possibility that this missing person had resurfaced, only to disappear again after creating one of the most complex crimes in modern history. Months passed as authorities searched the woods, nearby towns, and national records for any trace of the unknown manipulator. Agents followed leads across state lines, re-examined old witness statements, and re-interviewed people who had once known the missing individual. Every lead collapsed into nothing. It was as though the writer had vanished into the air after leaving behind the journals as a final message or a final taunt. At the same time, Noah Brenner remained missing. Despite the evidence linking him to the planning stages of the massacre, investigators were unable to determine whether he had acted willingly or under the influence of the hidden manipulator. Search teams combed through forests, rivers, and abandoned buildings, but Noah was never found. The absence of both figures left a void in the case that no amount of evidence could fill. Today, the Brenner mansion stands untouched, a monument to a tragedy that no one fully understands. Its windows remain shuttered, its halls silent, and its once celebrated dining room frozen in time. Authorities sealed the property permanently, and visitors who pass by describe a strange heaviness in the air around it, as if the unfinished story still lingers within its walls. Every Thanksgiving, the world remembers Maplewood's darkest day, not only for the horror of the event, but for its unresolved questions. People continue to wonder whether the real mastermind ever left the shadows, or whether another perfect experiment is quietly being prepared somewhere, waiting for the right moment to begin.